Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Larry. Today I have quite a challenging edit here. You can see that this image is really rough and we're going to edit this image from here to here. Let's get straight into the video. So what I particularly like about this image is that it has a whole lot of things that we would like to work on. For instance, you can see that we have a lot of loose hairs here that we'll get rid of, and also here, for instance, you can see that most of the retouch and most of the artistic work that we wanted to do wasn't so perfect. So here I wanted a completely round circle here, and this sort of bleeded out, and this will correct as well, and it will correct the loose ends of the hair here. And what I would also do, maybe I can create a layer here and show you what we're going to be working on. So we'll get rid of the loose ends here. So I'll select my brush, this we'll get rid of, and also here we'll try to clean and get more circular patches here, and of course all the skin imperfections, most of it we'll get rid of. And down here we would try to clean this up, remove this here, and get rid of this hair here. All the loose hairs we'll get rid of, and here we'll get rid of this as well. Here the same, so the same here, the same here. And also with the lips, I would try to extend this color here so that I can get a perfect lipstick here, and here I would smoothen this up to fill in some sections that were not filled here as well. And here I'll do the same to fill this up, and here I think it went in too deep, so maybe I'll truncate this part a little bit. We don't want to have this here. And yeah, we can work on the hair and remove also these loose ends here if we want to. So it's pretty good because this image would allow us to touch on everything. We'll do dodging and burning, we'll do blemish removal, we'll do frequency separation and everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the loose ends of the hair. So for instance here, there are different ways of doing it. You can use a clone stamp tool, you can use the spot healing brush tool, and I'm going to teach you all the two methods, then you can decide on which one works for you best, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to just call this hair and tiny spots. Then over here I'm going to zoom in deeper. So what the clone stamp tool does is that you can press S to select the clone stamp tool, or you can just come on the left panel here and click clone stamp tool. So what a clone stamp, how you use it is that you select, for instance, an area that you think is good. So for instance here, if I think I want to remove this hair here, right, and I feel like this section is okay, so I just pick this, press Alt. When you see that you press Alt, it changes the cursor, right? So it means that it's ready to pick. So you click, Alt click, then you leave it and you paint over. So you just paint over where you would want to remove. So you do it each time. You pick a good area and you paint this over. Pick a good area and paint this over. If it's not working, what happens most of the time is that by default Photoshop selects current layer, and when this happens, it means that the clone stamp is only going to pick from this layer, which contains basically no information. So if you click and you paint, you see that it's not going to work. So what you have to make sure is that you have current layer and below, or all layers. So I'm just going to click and I'm going to paint over, right? If you see some changes in the color, like here, you can see that it's getting a bit darker. Don't worry, we're going to get rid of this with frequency separation. So I'm going to click and paint. The next method that you can also use is the spot healing brush, which is also here, which is J. The shortcut is J. When you click on it, I find it pretty easy and better to use sometimes, depending on what I'm applying, because you just have to paint, right? When you paint, Photoshop automatically detects what is there and puts the best proximity match that would work. And also there are three options here. You can choose content aware, create texture, or proximity match, but for most of what I do, content aware seems to work fine. So just paint and drag. The best way to do it is to reduce the size of the brush to the area of application, but what I realize sometimes if it's too small, then you have to be very slow, right? And at least that's what the best way that you should do it, but depending on how much time you have. So I'm going to remove all the hair here, and I'm going to speed retouch so that you don't have to sit here and watch me remove all these 1,000 hairs. Okay, so I think the first part is done. Let's look at where we were before. So let's just zoom in a bit deeper here. This is before and this is after. So as you can see, I got rid of most of the loose hairs that were here. So the next thing I'm going to try to work on now is to perfect these artistic stuff that I wanted to do here. So the problem here also is that I had some loose ends that I would also correct here. I'm going to use the same method. I'm also going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go this artistic fix, right? artistic fix. So here I'm going to use the same method. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. So basically I'm going to increase the size of the brush. So like for instance this one here, I'm going to select this area here and I'm just going to paint in here. So select here and paint in. And here I'm going to do the same. I'm going to select and I'm going to paint in. Here I'm going to do the same. I'm going to paint in. So that's too much. Do select a brighter area, paint in. Select a brighter area, paint in. Paint in. Paint in here. So when it's too dark, you can just always undo and apply this again. Right, I paint this one in here as well. And here I'm going to work on this one here as well. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush. I'm going to go in a bit deeper. Select the clone stamp tool again. And I'm going, so it's going to take my time because there's so much to be worked on here. So I'm going to select and I'm going to paint in gradually. Select a good section. Undo. Brush this in here. So you can see that we have some color differences here, but don't worry about this now. All this will fix with frequency separation. We're going to really blend in all the colors. And for instance, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to refine the cuts here. So here it's a bit interesting how I'm going to do this. What I'll do is I'll select the lasso tool, and here I'm going to click and drag, right? So I'm going to just highlight around it. And I'm going to make my radius, I think I should have chosen the radius of 0. Then what I'll do here is I'm going to zoom in, right? I'm going to select the clone stamp tool, reduce the size of the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to select. The reason why I made this selection here is that I don't want to go. So for instance, if I click here and I paint, it wouldn't work because I only want to apply it in this selection. That's why I always first made the selection. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to paint in. So it's going to take some time to reduce and do this slowly, right? I'm going to paint this in. So the reason why it's bleeding out here is because my feather was not at 0, my feather was at 5. That's why it seems to be bleeding out. So here this is done. Let's look at before. This is before, this is after, right? And I'm going to do the same one here. Here I'm going to select the lasso tool again, make sure my feather is 0, and I'm going to paint, select this section here. So specifically the area where I want this to be applied to. And here I'm going to do the same. Select the clone stamp, select and paint, select and paint, right? I'm going to do the same thing here. So where you can see that it doesn't bleed out because my feather was completely 0. So it's only going to exclusively apply this to the area where I have selected. So I'm going to paint this in here as well. So Control D to deselect. I can correct this here. Control D to deselect. Let's look at before. This is before, this is after. See that we've corrected this as well. We can zoom out. Let's look at before. Let's look at after. See that we're really working on this. So I'm going to do the same for all the other spots that I have here. The principle is the same. And I'm going to speed this up so that doesn't take much of your time as well. So now we're done with that aspect too. Let's look at before and after. So I can zoom in a bit deeper here. Turn this layer off and on. You see that we corrected most of the imperfections from what we were trying to do. So let's look at where we started from. This is where we started from. We got rid of the hairs. Then now we fixed these tiny spots here. The next thing that we're going to go here, previously we're just doing warm up, right? Now we're going to get a bit deeper. So we're going to start with the retouching from the skin imperfections, and this we're going to use frequency separation. And the trick here is that frequency separation is just you generate 2 layers, one a texture layer and one a color layer, and you normally do the skin blemishes retouching on the texture layer, and you do the other corrections on the color layer. I can show you how this is done. What you have to do is you just create a visible stamp layer. You can do this by pressing plus to create a new layer, then Control Alt Shift E. This creates a visible stamp layer. So a visible stamp layer is just, it contains an image of all the things that we've done so far. So everything below here, it creates it in one image. So what you do here is that you can duplicate this layer here. Then you call one of the layers color, and you call the other layer texture. So what you do first with the color layer is that you come to Gaussian blur. So you go to filter, then you go to blur, Gaussian blur, and here you can typically choose so what the standard idea is that you choose a radius where you don't see most of the blemishes that you have on the model skin, but I like to work it in the reverse way. If you're following my videos, you know that I hardly use radiuses of 24 and stuff so to generate my frequency separation. Typically I work with a radius of something between 6 and 10 because I like to see the imperfections when I'm doing the Gaussian blur at the end of the day, and you will understand this in the subsequent steps. So here I choose a radius of between 6 to 10. This depends on your image, but I just, like I said, use a radius where I still see most of the imperfections on the model skin. And here just press OK. Then come to the texture layer, turn on the texture layer, then come to image, then apply image. Then here you're going to choose subtract. So when you choose subtract, the offset is, the scale is typically 1, and I think the offset is 1 to 8. I think the scale is 2 here. And here we're going to choose the layer that is our color layer here. So come to here and choose color layer. So you just select, it gives you a pop-up of all the layers that you have here, and what we're going to choose is the color layer because that's the first layer of our frequency separation. And then just press OK. Then when you come here, select the color layer and change the blending options to linear light. So what this does is that I can group these two layers. It creates two layers for you, one containing the color information only, so you don't have any information with respect to texture, and the other layer creates a texture layer. Now you can see how tedious these frequency separation layers generation is, with respect to time. So what I typically do is I created a free action that I'll put in the description section that you can just click to generate these frequency separation layers for you. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm just going to come down here, load your actions, right? And the action that we're going to use is called my frequency separation. So when you click on this, we're going to put in the same radius that we put in at the beginning. This is a radius of about 6, and we're going to press OK. Now you can see that we have two layers generated for here for us as well. So the same color layer, and we have the texture layer here as well. So here, this is where we're going to dive in a bit deeper into the retouching. There are different ways you can do retouching with the frequency separation. You can use the dodging and burning method. You can also use the Gaussian blur. You can use the mixer brush tool. So just for demonstrative purposes, I'm going to try to touch on all these other methods, but the ease, it's with respect to how easy you want to work. Some people prefer to use the Gaussian blur method. Some people prefer to use the mixer brush tool. And basically for me, most of the time I use both. So here, that's the same thing I'm going to do. So select the color layer here, and to use the Gaussian blur method, we're going to go to the lasso tool, and here make sure that you choose a feather here of about 15, so that the effect that you're going to be applying is not going to be quite a sharp transition, but it's going to feather out in the effect wise, right? And here what we would do is typically I start on the forehead, right? But here I want to start from here. What you can do is you can turn off the texture layer and see where you are applying, how your frequency separation is actually working. So here I'm going to select a section of her chin. So here you have to be a bit careful here, because you can see typically you don't have anything on the model's face, so it's very easy to select. But here we have a lot of white here that I don't want to bleed into, so I'm going to select outside the layer. If in the process of selection you make a mistake, so for instance you don't want this section to be there, you can press Alt and click and drag to remove this. And if you want to add, you can also press Shift, then click and add this to your selection. So here I can just undo this because my previous selection was correct. Okay, I'll do this again. I'm just going to click and select the area that I want here. So this is fine. And here you're going to go to filter, you're going to go to blur, then you go to Gaussian blur. So here you're going to add a radius as much as you want, what you think is best for you. So here you can see that at 6 I still see some irregularities with respect to the skin toning, and here I'm going to increase the radius to a point where I don't see most of the irregularities. So here 29 seems to be fine as well, 26 to be fine. So I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to turn on the texture layer. If you want, you can also apply the frequency separation with the texture layer turned on. This is just a matter of taste. So I can undo this so that you see how you can do this without the texture layer being selected. I'm going to go back here, right? Go to my lasso tool, turn on my texture layer, and I'm going to come to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. So here I'm going to check to see at a point where I feel like this is okay, right? So think 30 seems to work fine here. So when you've done this, you're going to press Ctrl D. Then I'm going to move to another section of the image. So this is the section here. I'm going to select this part as well. And here I'm also going to make sure that I'm going to bleed in into the section of the whites, right? So I'm going to select this section here as well. Right click. There are two ways you can do this. You can go back to filter, then Gaussian blur, or you can use this shortcut that you have here, Alt Ctrl F. So when you use this applies the same radius that you used in the previous selection that you had here. So that here we use something about 30, so it's going to apply the same thing here. We just right click and choose Gaussian blur, and it applies this here as well. And now we're going to go up, so we're going to do this throughout the whole image, right? So I'm going to select here as well. I'm going to add Gaussian blur. I'm going to select the section of the nose. I'm going to add Gaussian blur. The same thing here. So I'm going to go through the whole image and apply this wherever I want to smoothen the skin. What you have to take note of the fact is that frequency separation normally flattens the image, so you have to make sure that you don't, for instance, select an area where you have highlights. So for instance, here I have highlights and here I have shadows, so it wouldn't be a good idea to select this whole place because it's going to flatten that part. And what makes an image have sort of a contouring is with respect to the highlights and the shadows of the image. So here you do have to try as much as possible not to select areas where you have highlights and shadows. So for here, for instance, if I want to apply this, I'm going to select only this part here, and I'm going to apply my Gaussian blur. And here, if I want to do this, I'm going to select this part as well and apply the same. Sometimes I'm victim to some of the things that I say, so but when you make this mistake, you can always undo. So I'm going to go to the section of my forehead, and I'm going to work on this as well. So select this section, Gaussian blur. Here I'm going to select this section here as well. So you can see that I told you that do not worry about the color imperfections that we had at the beginning, because we're going to smoothen all these color imperfections with frequency separation. So Gaussian blur. You can see that we've done this most of the time. So now I'm going to work on this section here as well. So this tiny spot here, Gaussian blur. Now when you're done, just press Ctrl D. What you see happen here is that I have some of the whites bleeding in here, which I do not want. So I'm going to undo this, right? Because I want to have it the way that I want. And what we can do is, instead of using Gaussian blur, I'm going to use the other technique that I said I was going to teach you using the mixer brush tool. So here, this area as well, I'm going to use Gaussian blur because it's easier. And here as well. Now the mixer brush tool works as follows. So what it does is that it selects, so I'm going to select the mixer brush tool here. Typically I use a wetness of about 10, load of about 75%, mix of 90, and flow of 100. So what it does is that it picks, so when you brush, for instance, between here to here, the mixer brush tool picks the color here and paints it in the area where you are applying it, right? You see that it's blending in all the colors, and just for demonstrative purposes, this is not what we want, but just for you to understand how this works, right? So what I typically do is I turn off the texture layer, because here I'm working strictly on the color layers, because I don't want to see anything from the texture and see where I'm blending in. So here I'm going to start here, and I'm going to blend in the colors from this section. So just paint in. You can see that it's mixing the colors here. I can show you before and after. This is before, this is before, this is after. You see that we're blending in the colors here. I'm going to go to this section as well. I'm going to blend this in. So just paint in, right? As you paint in, it's mixing the colors over there. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So just mixing the colors here. And I left in some sections with the Gaussian blur so that I can use the mixer brush tool for you to see how it works. So when you turn off the texture layer, you can see that this section of the model's face is so not looking good, right? This is not retouched, and we're going to fix this with the mixer brush tool. So just press B for the mixer brush tool, and I'm going to paint in this. I'm going to mix the colors here. So just look here very well. You see that this is going to mix in as I paint. You see that this goes away, right? I really like the mixer brush tool working with it, but sometimes it's more easier when you have an editing tablet to work with, because with the mouse it's sometimes pretty annoying. I use the mouse several times with the mixer brush tool, but in comparison to a tablet, this is way easier. And here, for instance, I'm going to go in a bit deeper here. and I'm going to reduce the size of the mixer brush tool, and I'm going to paint in around the spots here. I'm going to reduce the size here. Now let's go to other areas where we think we've not retouched. So here, for instance, you can see that the section of the forehead, the section here has not been retouched. I'm going to increase the size of the brush, and I'm going to brush this in as well. So let's paint in this. So any section that you see that you think is not really blending in with what has been already done, you can perfect this with the mixer brush tool. So here I said I was going to use a mixer brush tool to correct this. I'm going to paint this in. This in and here as well. So the sections where I had this white spot, I didn't touch this because the Gaussian blur was going to be difficult to work with. But here you can see how easy it is with the mixer brush tool. I just move in between. Oops. Can undo, and I can paint this in better. Yeah. See how easy it is. So like I said, it's easier to work with the mixer brush tool when you have a Wacom tablet. So here I switch to my Wacom tablet because it's easier. Like I said, I'm just going to paint this in. Here, let's blend this in back. Let's zoom out and see if there are sections that we've not retouched. So here, I'm going to retouch this part of a hand as well, some part with the mixer brush too, so that you see how it works. So B, I can also turn on the texture layer for you to see what we're doing, right? So let's go in here, go to B, and let's increase the brush, and let's brush this in. Okay, now let's zoom out by pressing Ctrl 0. Right, and let's look at before. So this is before frequency separation, and this is after. You can see that we've had a solid transformation. Let's zoom in a bit deeper here. This is before, and this is after. This is before, this is after. This is before, this is after. So now I'm trying to look in sections where I think this is not blending in well. I'm looking at her nose area here. You can see that the transition is not so perfect. Look at before, look at after, look at before, look at after. So I can fix this as well. I can zoom in a bit deeper here, flip the image by pressing R to turn this around and blend this in better. So I'm going to reduce the size of the brush. I'm going to blend this in so that the transition is better. Here I'm going to mix this as well. Flip this back, R, press B. We're going to continue painting in, right? And don't worry, you can do frequency separation as much as you want. If you feel like you've not done this well, you can create a new layer in between and work on this again. So let me zoom out, reset the view. This is before, after, before, after, before, after, right? I think this is fine. Like I said, if you feel this is not sufficient enough, you can always come down here, select the layer, and apply a new Gaussian blur. Okay, just come to filter, layer, apply Gaussian blur. You can apply this as much as you want. This doesn't matter, right? It's just a matter of taste. So here I can do the same thing here. I can apply Gaussian blur here as well. Go to her face area. So I'm just repeating the same thing that I did previously, right? To have a better transition. It's not required, but just to let you know that you can repeat this if you want. So let's zoom out a little bit. So let's look at before. This is before, this is after. You see that we've had quite a solid transition. This is before and after, before, after. So what I'm going to work on now is I'm going to work on the tiny spots here. Here, for instance, you can see that I have some tiny spots here that I would want to get rid of, right here as well. And to do this, I'm going to go to the texture layer, and I'm going to use the clone stamp tool, right? So just press S to select the clone stamp tool. You select a good area like we did at the beginning, and you make sure that like here you have current and below selected. So click and select, and oops, current and below is not supposed to be selected. It's supposed to select only the texture layer here. So select current layer, and I'm going to click and paint, right? Click and paint, click and paint. You can also use the spot healing brush tool. So just click, and Photoshop automatically thinks of, sorry, here we don't want to sample all layers. It happens to me every time, so just click and paint, right? But what happens to me sometimes that I feel like the spot healing brush I lose the texture. So here you can see, I don't know how good you can see this, but you can see that I've lost the texture here. So that's why sometimes I prefer to work with the clone stamp tool. So just press S and click and paint, click and paint. So I'm going to do the same thing and correct all the spots that I want to fix here. So what you can also do, if you are not finding the spots, you can also turn on a black and white layer. So you can come down here, select black and white, and you can reduce the reds and reduce the yellow as well. This helps sometimes to find put this on top of the frequency separation layer, and sometimes helps you to find the imperfections quite easily. So here you can see that these are now very easily visible. So I'm going to continue this. Okay, this is done. I got rid of most of the imperfections that I want to get rid of. What occurred to me here is that here you can see that the transition here that's not so nice, right? So what I will do here is also that I'll turn off the texture layer, and you can see that when I turn off the texture layer, you can see what the problem is. You can see that the color transition here is not so good. So to correct this, I'm going to use my mixer brush tool. I'm going to select the color layer. I'm going to flip this a little bit, and I'm going to select B for the mixer brush tool, and I'm going to brush in. So you can see that all the transitions that are not going to be good, I'm going to brush this in to make sure that transitions are better. So I'm going to reduce the brush, and I'm going to continue brushing in to make so like I feel that the current transitions are way better. So here I'm going to brush in here as well. Here the same thing. Here you see that it's too dark, right? So I'm going to keep brushing. Flip this, reduce the, okay, and I'm going to keep brushing here as well. So the good thing is that when you are taking the pictures, make sure that the makeup artist does all the stuff so that you don't spend so much time here on Photoshop trying to correct everything. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time here. Now let's turn on the texture layer again. I'm going to restore the view by pressing reset. Let's look at before, after. This is quite a solid transformation, guys. I mean, let's look at where we were completely before we started. So press Ctrl Alt, click the background. This is before. Then we worked on the hair, remove the imperfections from the artistic look. Then we worked on our frequency separation, and then we used the black and white layer to help us to see these imperfections that we had better. What we're going to do now is I'm going to correct so that I feel like the toning of the model's skin is it's not like the way I would want it. I'm going to put one particular tone right to the whole image, and to do this I'm going to use the gradient map. You can select a section of the model skin that you like the color, so come down here, select gradient map, and I'm going to hide this layer here, click on the gradients map that I have here, and I'm going to select one section of the model skin. So for instance, if I feel like this color is better for me and I want to have the same color throughout, you can just select this. And good, it's not working here, and I'm going to show you the reason why. So just press cancel here. Cancel here is because I selected the mask, not the gradient map. So here, select the gradient map, come down here, click this down here to select one color, and I'm going to choose one color here that I think works best for me. And I think I already worked on this, and typically I use the same colors for all my images, and the color here is 8C6242. So just press OK, and here when you look at down here, you see the hue, you see the saturation, you see the brightness, and here take note of the brightness. Here this is 55, and I'm going to put in this 55 as the location, and I'm going to select the second color here, and I'm going to change the color also to DFCO9E. So So this is a lighter tone of brown. I'm going to select the same thing here. And here I forgot to check the location, so we can check the location here again. This is 87, and I'm going to put in 87 here. I'm going to press OK. So now turn on the gradient map. And this doesn't work, of course, because I'm applying it to the whole image. To come down here and select color, right? And here what we're going to do is we're going to paint in this color effect only to the area of the model skin. So I'm going to click on the gradient map here. I'm going to invert this by pressing Ctrl I. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the brush tool. Okay, I'm not going to use a mixer brush. I'm going to select the normal brush. So you can press Shift B to alternate between the brush. I'm going to increase the size of the brush. Don't worry, it's about the flow yet. And now I'm going to paint in. If you do not see, so what happens here is that if you have black, it means that you don't want to reveal it. Wherever you paint in white, it means that you want to reveal it. So here, come down here and switch between black to white by pressing X, and then select the brush tool again. And now I'm going to paint in the color. You can see that wherever I'm painting, I'm going to see the color that I selected. Don't worry about where it's the perfection yet. Now I just want to paint my selection, and when I'm done, I'm going to work on the opacity. So you can see that I painted in the whole image because I was a bit impatient. And here I'm going to reduce the size of the brush, flip back to black, reduce the size of the brush, and I'm going to paint in back where I do not want. So when you have black and you're painting in black, it means that you don't want to have this effect there, right? I'm going to paint in back where I didn't want this. And what the reason why this is so powerful is you can see that even where we had this color on the model's face, it got rid of all the color and replaced it with the color that we are applying, because on the blending options we selected color, right? And this is how it works. So here I'm going to paint in this, and I'm going to remove this also from the white sections that I have here. It's going to paint black there back again. So this is fine. So if you make a mistake, just press X and paint this back in to perfect it. And I'm going to go back to the forehead area. I'm going to switch back to black because I don't want to have the effect here. I'm just going to paint this in. I can remove this from her forehead region to, from her hair area. I feel like this is not needed there. What I'm going to do now, press Ctrl 0. So you see that the whole image looks very warm because I painted this in these sections here. And I'm going to reduce the opacity because this is not what I want. This is too much, right? So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to tone this down to something of about, I think 50% is fine. Okay, I still feel this is too much, so I'm going to reduce this to something about 30. And let's look at before. This is before, this after. Let's go in a bit deeper. Oops. Ctrl Z. Sorry, made a mistake here. Zoom in a bit deeper here. Before, after. So we just put in we try to unify the colors that I have in the model's face. This is before, this after. And what I would like to do here is I'm going to do another layer of frequency separation. This is not required, but I still do. I'm not so satisfied with the transition that I have on the model's face. So I'm going to create a new frequency separation layer, and I already taught you how I did this, so I'm going to speed this up. And the reason why I created this second frequency separation is, like I said, because I'm still not so convinced with the color transitions that I have here. And what I'm going to do here is, for instance, a forehead area. I'm going to select back the forehead. Maybe I should zoom out a bit here, and I'm going to go to filter. So I'm going to select the color layer here, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, right? And I'm going to use a radius of about 35. This is fine. And I'm going to do the same thing. So here, for instance, I really feel like the transition is not the way I would want to have it. So I can select this back again. Now go to filter, Gaussian blur. This time around, I would want to monitor what I'm putting in. So here, 48 is, 47 is fine. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to select the section as well. So that's why I said that you can do the frequency separation as much as you want. And here as well, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to her lower body area, and I'm going to blur this in as well. Come here, blur. I'm going to choose a Gaussian blur of about 47. This is okay. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to apply the same Gaussian blur in the section of neck. I'm going to work on this section as well. I think this was too much, right? So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to come there and to put it in a manual figure. So here I think 47 was too much. I would like to use something about 9 is fine. So now I'm going to press Ctrl D. So now let's look at the new frequency separation that we did. So this is before, this after. You see that I really prefer this color transitions, and I'm going to work on this section as well. Select this section here. I'm going to blur this as well. So I think this is more like what I would want to see. So let's look at before completely. So this is where we started again. This is before, this is after. I can zoom in a bit deeper. This is before, this is after, right? This is quite a solid transition. So the next thing I'm going to be working on is dodging and burning. And what dodging and burning actually just does is that it highlights. So you have two sections of an image. Basically, you always have the brighter area, which is the highlights, and you have the darker areas, which are called the shadows. And when you do dodging and burning, what you try to do is you try to make the areas that are brighter, and the areas that were darker. So to make it so that image, what happens sometimes when you do frequency separation is that you sometimes flatten the image completely, and when you do dodging and burning, then you bring out back the contouring of the image. So to do this, I have an action that I created that can generate the dodging and burning layers for you, but I'm also going to teach you how you can do this. So it's basically easy. You come down here and you can select, for instance, your curves, right? And you can change the curves to multiply. So you can call this your dodge. So there are several ways of creating dodging and burning layers. Sorry, this is the burn. The darker layer is called a burn because burn signifies dark. And I can duplicate this layer here, and I can call this dodge. And what you just have to change is the blending options and change this to screen, right? And you can invert this, invert here, and you invert here. Then you have your dodging and burning layers. So like I said, I have a layer that creates this very easy for you. So you can just click on my dodge and burn to generate these layers for you. So now you can see that I have two layers that I created. One is a dodge and one is a burn. So we're going to use the burn to accentuate the shadows, so like the darker sections of the image, and the dodge to work on the highlights, so the brighter sections of the image. And what you can do here is that the trick that I sometimes do is that I turn off the frequency separation layers, because when you have the frequency separation layers, sometimes you don't see which area, like I said, the frequency separation blends in colors, right? So sometimes you don't see which sections were brighter and which sections were darker. So I'm going to turn these layers off, and I'm going to start with my dodge, right? And I'm going to flip the image. So here, for instance, the dodge, I can see that the nose area here is brighter, so I can make this brighter. And to do this, I'm just going to select B for the brush tool, then I'm going to change my flow to very low, something of about 5, right? So that I can apply more effects here. And make sure that here you don't have black, because the layer mask is black, so it means that you wouldn't see anything that you apply here. So I'm going to change press X to toggle between black and white, right? So I want to review, so I'm going to press X for white here, and I'm just going to paint this in. So I'm going to paint this in areas where I want to see this effect. So here's brighter, so I'm going to make this brighter. And also I'm going to flip the image back. This section is also brighter, right? So I'm going to just following the image and making the areas that were brighter. I can even reduce the flow. I think this is too much. And I'm going to reduce the size of the image, and I'm going to do the same thing. So every area that I think was brighter, like here for instance was brighter, I'm going to make this brighter. And the section of her jaw is also brighter. I'm going to make this brighter. So the same thing throughout, right? So now I'm done with the dodge area. I'm going to go to my burn, and I'm going to select the burn layer here, and I'm going to do the same thing. So areas where I think were darker, so like her nose area here, this section I normally like to make it darker so that it makes the nose stand out more. And then here was dark, I'm going to make this a bit darker, apply some shadows here. So normally her face area, so here for instance I like to make this a bit darker to shape in the face a little bit, and here make this darker, here make this darker, and down here as well the same thing, and all the other sections that I think this is required. So if you make a mistake, you can always press X to paint back, right, to undo the effect, and you can switch back to continue what you would like to do. So this is dodged. So now I think I'm done with my global dodging and burning. So let's turn on the frequency separation layers, right, to see what we've done. Let's flip the image back. So this is before, this is after. You can see that we brought back the contouring of the image. And what I can also do here is I can use dodging and burning to also make the hair pop out a little bit. So for instance, I can come to the dodge. I'm going to really reduce the size of the brush here to very, very small. And I'm just going to, I can reduce the flow to something of about 10. And I can just paint in, so that you can see that wherever I'm painting in the brush, it's going to make that part of the hair stand out. So just brush this through. So it doesn't have to be so perfect. You just want to have some sections popping out from the hair to make it stand out as well. Now I'm going to go to the burn, and I'm going to do the same thing. So just burn some sections. This will just make the hair stand out, because as you see the dodging and burning, they also add some kind of virtual volume to the hair. Now this is fine. I'm going to Control 0 to zoom everything out, and now let's look at before. This is before, this is after. If you feel that the effect is too much, what you can always do is to come down to the layer here and reduce the opacity. So I can take this to 80%. And let's look at before, this is after. I think this is perfect. This is just the way I would like to have it. Now what appeared to me, for instance, here is that you can see, look at this area here. When I turn this on and off, you can see that I seem to have applied some burn here that I did not want. So I can come down here, increase the size of the brush, right, and go to black, because I want to paint in black so that I don't see the effect there. So X to black, and I'm going to paint this out so that I don't see the effect here. So this is how you correct some mistakes that you might have done in the process. So this is fine, and here I think it's too much. I can paint this out a bit. And now let's zoom out. So this is before, this is after. Let's look at the total overall. This is before, this is after. This is quite a solid transformation. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some volume to the hair. I feel like the hair, I mean, just to show you how this is done, to increase the volume in the hair a little bit, I'm going to create a visible stamp layer by pressing Ctrl Alt Shift and E. And I'm going to come down here. So just select the layer here. So I can call the layer hair fix. And I'm going to come down here, up here, and choose, so come to filter, then choose liquify. And here, what Photoshop does for you sometimes is that you can work on the face. So for instance, if you feel like her chin is too much, or hair you want to, for instance, I can show you an image here, face shape. You can reduce the size of her chin if you want. You can play with, you can increase this. So these are things that you could do, but this is not what I want to do here. So I'll just put 0 here. What I want to do is to add volume to the hair. So here I'm going to come to the swap tool. So here, for instance, this is what I'm going to use, the forward warp tool, and I'm going to increase the size of the brush, right? So I'm going to, and this is of course too much, and I'm going to drag, click and drag this out a little bit, just to add a bit of volume, and just to, it might not be required here, but just to let you know how you can do this, right? So just click and drag, click and drag. Just click and drag, click and drag. Oops, that was too much. Undo. And now let's look at preview. This is before, this is after. You can see that we've added some volume to the hair. So we are satisfied with this. So just let's click OK here. And let's look at before again, after. Okay, this is fine. So the next thing I'm going to do now is the color gradient. So the color gradient just adds a color mood to the image, and this can be done in several ways. And I have to confess that I'm not very good with color gradient, so I always try to play with the colors to see what is going to work. If it doesn't work, I just reset and start again. And to do the color gradient, I'm going to work first with the gradient map. And I actually like this color. The image looks like nice as well in a black and white scale. But I'm going to continue to do whatever I want to do. So here I'm going to, so this side of the gradient map is the shadows, right? And on the right side you have the highlights. So what happens is that whatever color that you choose here will transition from the shadows directly into the highlights. So you have a very smooth transition in between the two. And here I'm going to click on the shadows, and I'm going to choose whatever color I would like to use for the shadows. So I wanted to use something more magenta-ish, right? And here the color that I found to work was 6E2592. And here I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to come to the highlights here, and I'm going to add something very bluish. So here the color also works was 151 FF 5. So there's no really hard rule to this. You have to play with the colors and see what works. And I have to be honest, like I said here, this is not something that I'm doing just now. I already tried to play with the color grading to see which color would be working most of the time, because I'm not very good at color grading myself. And here I'm going to press OK. What I'm going to do down here is, because I want to apply this color, I'm going to go to color, right? I want to apply this color, and I'm going to reduce the opacity from here from 100 to something of about 15. Now this is fine. Let's look at where we transition the image. This is before, this is after. We get in there, right? Now we have this blue magenta-ish tone. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go to my selective color, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the reds and the yellows and try to add some different colors in here. So for instance, with the reds, I can pump in some magenta here. So 18 is fine, and I can come to my magenta, and I think here, so just go extreme. I go to normally to the 2 extremes and see that, okay, this is magenta. This, I mean, here you add magenta, and on the opposite side you add the opposite color, right? So here I don't seem to like what is happening here. So I'm going to go to 0, and then I'm going to come to my yellows, do the same thing here. I do not like this because it's already magenta-ish, so I'm going to come down here, and I think I like this pop here. I'm going to add in some more yellows here, and I'm come to my black, and black sometimes add general contrast, right? So I'm going to pop in some black here. 6 is fine. And I'm going to come to my yellow. I'm going to do the same thing here. I think I'm not going to do much here because there's not really yellows here. So what this actually does is that it applies yellows to, it applies cyan or all these colors to the sections that are yellow in the image. So because I do not have much yellows here, that's why I do not see this. When we went to the red channel, typically skin tones are buried between yellows and red, so that's why most of the colors that I applied here could be seen quite drastically, because the image is always, the skin is the most part of the image, so you can see most of these effects. Now I'm going to go to greens. I don't have much greens here, so I wouldn't see much here as well. What I can play with a bit is the blues, because I have some blues from the background. So let's see, if I play with the cyan, you can see that it's applying this to where I had a blue, right? So this is, I'm going to go down here a bit, and here I'm just going to play with the colors, right? I don't really know what I'm going for at the end of the day. I just play with it and pick what comes out. So yellow, I think this is fine here, and I'm going to add some contrast as well to the yellow with the black. Now this is fine with me. Let's group these 2 layers, and I'm going to call this color, oops, made a mistake here, I'm sorry. I'm going to rename this and call this color grade. Now typically I'm going to add some contrast to the image. You can do this with the curves, and here what you can do is just create an S curve, right? So the S curve means you pull the side, the highlights up a little bit, so slightly up, and I'm going to pull down the shadows, so this adds quite a nice contrast to the image. So I think this image is done. This is what I wanted to do. This is what I wanted to get to. So now let's look at what we've been doing throughout this image. This is before, this is after. So I really like this image because it has, there was so much work that needs to be done here. So this is not typically, if you're watching my channel, you see that this was really a challenging edit. But I like this because it tells you where you can begin from and where you can end at. So this is before, and this is after. You see that we had a very solid transformation. Let's go through everything that we did at the beginning. So we worked on the hairs, right? We had some loose hairs here that we got rid of using this clone stamp tool and the spot healing brush, and then we fixed these tiny spots that I had here, right? And I worked a bit on the frequency separation to smoothen out the color. So most of the first step, or most of the biggest transition we had in the image was this first step here. Then I added some color toning to her skin, add more brown to the tone image, and I reduced the opacity here as well. You can see that here I chose color, and then I did a second frequency separation. Like I said, frequency separation you can do as much as you want. What happens is that the size of your image or the file becomes big, but what you can also do, you can always flatten the image. So when you right click and you choose flatten, it compresses all the images if you don't really have a big capacity on your hard drive. But I have that space, so why not? This is fine with me. Then the next thing that we did was dodging and burning. So we add some contouring to the image. Then after that, we added some volume to the hair just for demonstrative purposes to show that this can be done with the liquify tool in Photoshop. Then we added a best color tone. For me, this was quite a good transition of the image from here to here. So we added some color grading to the image, and finally some contrast. If you have any questions, please put this in the comment section. I will be very happy to answer all the questions for you. And if it's very difficult for you, I can also have a one-on-one with you for free, where I'll go through some image editing with you as well. Put all your comments here, subscribe to my channel, and please hit the like button if you found this video educative.